We're going to hear from the organiser of the conference in a minute, Jack Galvin-Wright, because our next speaker, who was going to be presenting on New South Wales, the other very recalcitrant state as far as special religious education, SRE, in New South Wales public schools, was Craig McPherson, who is a co-director of Fairness in Religion in Schools, FERIS, a parent and citizen group that's been campaigning to remove SRE from school hours in the same way as Alison's group is doing in Queensland. But unfortunately, Craig's not well. So we have another speaker who's going to take his place, and Jack is going to come and introduce her. Welcome, Jack, and then the mystery guest.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, conference. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. Colleagues, it's a shame that Craig is unwell today because FERIS has been fighting the fight against SRE for years, and it is a fight, with nearly everything that Alison so eloquently outlined in Queensland also applying to New South Wales. In fact, the legislation is even more prescriptive. So I'm not going to mention the fact that our students, many as young as 5, are every week being denied learning and segregated on religious lines. You can read all that in my report, which I'm told is also is handy if you're having trouble sleeping at night. Instead, I want to just briefly talk about what we can do to achieve some change and some positive recent developments in this space. Firstly, community support and activism continues to grow. Surveys continue to highlight that most parents support secular values and want religion to be taught after school hours, as evidenced in the parliamentary petition started last month by Stephen Cowgill, a parent and attendee here today. Secondly, there is an important precedent to follow in Victoria, where Scripture was formally moved outside school hours, virtually eliminating the program. And thirdly, in New South Wales, there is now a unified education alliance calling for change. The Primary Principals Association, the Secondary Principals Council, the Teachers Federation, and to a slightly lesser extent, the Parent and Citizen Body, all are arguing that SRE simply must go, or at the very least not interfere with curriculum time. In May this year, these peak groups issued a historic joint statement calling on the Education Minister to take action and at the very least implement an independent review. Unfortunately, so far Labor has continued to back the religious lobby. But with events like this and community action, colleagues, the pressure is growing. At the Teachers Federation, we don't give up. We continue to campaign, continue to build alliances. Because our schools need teachers, not preachers. Our students need education, not indoctrination. And to quote FERIS, that wasted learning time, the black hole in the school week, needs to be given back to the professionals, the teachers. And speaking of professionals, and to explain why we need education about diverse worldviews, not SRE, it's my great pleasure to introduce academic and Professor Dr. Anna Halafoff.
I have some slides somewhere. Hopefully someone has them. Okay, great. So I'm a sociologist of religion. I was actually really active in Victoria in the lead up to SRI being shifted out of school time. And informed by my research, I got into this debate, and I'm a very strong advocate for secular education. Okay, so I'm going to begin this presentation with a series of quotes that some of you may have already read by Associate Professor David Hastie of Alpha Crucis University College, the National Training University College of the Australian Christian Churches, from an opinion piece that he himself wrote, published in the ABC's Religion and Ethics blog soon after the revised Australian Curriculum version 9 was released to the public in April 2022. And I'm about to do so in order to present evidence, and here I draw on Ghassan Haj, that the myth of a white Christian Australia still dominates, and very much dominates the Australian curriculum, eclipsing Australia's diverse worldview reality. And this reality, and here I draw on Regina Ganter, is triangulated, and it includes First Nations, Asian, and European worldviews that are non-religious, religious, and or spiritual. So, on the 12th of May 2022, Hastie boasted that he contributed as a consultant to ACARA on the final stages of the new Australian history and civics and citizenship curricula, as ACARA responded promptly to the criticisms of an unhistorical lack of reference to Australia's Christian heritage and of attempts at a woke engineering in our classrooms by bringing in an additional tier of expert consultants who joined the existing panels to work on the next draft. Hastie touted his success, that the final version states it will include a focus on Australia's Western and Christian heritage, and that First Nations content had been reduced by about a third. All quotes. He then added that the new material related to Christianity in the 7 to 10 history curriculum is far more substantial, and that there is also explicit references to Australia's Christian heritage and culture, particularly in Year 7 civics and citizenship. He observed that as a symbolic document in an ostensibly secular but still quite religiously pluralistic country, a national history curriculum needs to accurately represent the religious past. My colleagues and my subsequent research reveals that the Christian content has in fact increased since 2015, and that there are now far more references to both Christianity and Islam in the Australian Curriculum version 9 HAS content than any other religions, and that this privileging of Christianity especially, but also of Abrahamic faiths, does not adequately reflect either historical facts or the contemporary worldview diversity and reality of young Australians. So Australia has always been, as we've heard already this morning, a culturally and religiously diverse nation of nations, evident in First Nations knowledge systems, languages and beliefs, and subsequent flows of trade and migration to and from Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. First Nations people have long and deep ties with who were at that time called Makassar Muslims of what is now called Indonesia. And at the end of the 19th century, really significantly large communities of Chinese and Japanese workers and migrants who practiced Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism were engaged in mining, pearling, and sugarcane industries and outnumbered Europeans across the far north of Australia. And in fact, it was fears regarding their numbers and strength, economic strength, that led to the introduction of the racist 1901 Immigration Restriction Act, known as the White Australia Policy. So this myth of a white Christian Australia was socially constructed at Federation through the introduction of this racist act and perpetuated throughout much of the 20th century until the institutionalizations of policies of multiculturalism in the 1980s. So 40 years on, in the 2020s, as already noted, citing Haj, Australia is still caught in contestation around these two competing versions of its national identity, the white Christian fantasy and versus the multicultural and multi-faith reality of Australia. And I would add there the diverse worldview composition, so not just multi-faith, but also a very strong secular and non-religious presence, particularly around that turn of the last century. So this battle, again, as we've heard in various ways this morning, has long been played out in relation to the place of religions in schools. So my colleagues and I this is a nationally representative Australian Research Council funded project. Like, it cannot be more robust in terms of the sample and the methods used in this study. Comprised 11 focus groups with a total of 94 students. You've got all of that up there. The survey, nationally representative telephone survey of 1,200 people, and then 30 follow-up in-depth interviews. So when asking the same question as the census, and we did this just so that we could compare with census data, it found that 52% of Australian teens self-identified as non-religious. So of course that's higher than the census where the parents fill out the form. 19% Catholic, 6% Anglican, 3% Muslim, 2% Buddhist and 1% Hindu. We also used a latent class analysis to identify 6 statistically distinct worldview types. So there's 23% who are strongly non-religious, who we call this worldly, 15% that are indifferent, 18% that are spiritual but not religious, 8% that are religious and spiritual, 20% that are nominally religious, and 17% who are religiously committed. So this actually reflects the worldview diversity within Australian classrooms. So the study also revealed that while 93% of Australian teens think that having people of many different faiths makes Australia a better place to live, disturbingly, there is about 20% of them that had neutral to negative views about religious minorities. And of particular importance in our study is that we did find that students who had had general religious education about diverse religions, and largely in Catholic or other faith-based schools, actually had the most positive views of religious minorities. So this is the first time in a major study in Australia that we actually have evidence that increasing religious literacy or diverse worldviews literacy can play a significant role in reducing negative stereotypes about religion. So as a result of our research and then other campaigns run by FIRIS in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, equivalent, as you've heard again already, there really has been a very substantive call for more content about diverse worldviews in the Australian curriculum and in various iterations of state curricula. And yet, what actually happened is, like, you know, in terms of the Christian privilege, came down to Christian lobbying. We literally went in with our report to everyone, and everyone, like the group that published another report arguing for more Christian content and everything in schools were in there like just before us. So, you know, anyway, I digress. Finally, in 2021, troubling reports of rampant religious bullying in Australian schools reignited the religion in schools debate here in New South Wales particularly. And there's been, I think, a very disturbing movement calling for cooperative education as a model that combines, you know, it's actually trying to get the SRE teachers to be teaching about diverse worldviews. Sorry, I shouldn't even call them teachers. The SRE volunteers to be teaching about diverse worldviews. And so I strongly argue that while worldviews education is certainly more appropriate for Australia's secular schools than cooperative education, this worldview education must be delivered by teachers and must be embedded within the Australian curriculum and various state iterations of that. So just to wrap things up, so supporters of the SRE programs claim that they are beneficial for teaching values that only religions can instill, and that they can advance respect for multiculturalism and foster strong religious identity, and also they claim to counter extremism. But these arguments are highly problematic, as values, as you all know, of respect, understanding, care, compassion are universal values and found within many non-religious traditions as well as religious traditions, and certainly not the exclusive domain of religion. And moreover, experts in preventing violent extremism, and I used to work very much in this space at Monash Uni, have long argued that values education, especially one that advances a narrow, Judeo-Christian value mandate, or even religious values more generally over and above other values, actually risks creating and or exacerbating social exclusion of minorities, and also enables far-right discourses. So both of these outcomes can thereby potentially increase susceptibility to alienation and possibly even result, worst case, in violence. So if we genuinely wish to counter prejudices against and negative stereotyping of religious minorities, which is particularly important in our current time, the most effective way to do that is to include more teaching about diverse worldviews in all schools, as I said before, taught by qualified and trained teachers, and to have this meaningfully incorporated equitably in the Australian curriculum, and to challenge that Christian privilege that currently exists. And not just persists, is actually getting stronger, right? So given the large proportions of young Australians who are not religious and who identify as spiritual but not religious, this type of education in the 21st century must incorporate, it's got to be, again, this triangulated non-religious, spiritual and diverse religions. So it's not just multi-faith world religion models anymore, that's gone. It's a triangulated secular, spiritual, religious. And this is coming out of European, UK research as well, not just ours in Australia. So inspired by research on international best practices, in Victoria we did manage to replace SRI with learning about worldviews and religions, that's what it was officially called, in humanities and ethical capability, as part of the Respectful Relationships strategy in 2015. And I think it's very clear that it's about time that other Australian states did the same. And moreover, in doing so and having this diverse worldviews education embedded in the curriculum, it would accurately reflect the history of this country and also the lived reality of young Australians today. And we have evidence to back that up. Thank you.